Before Abraham was born, the world already believed it knew the truth. Before his name challenged kings, priests, and gods, society had already decided what was sacred and what was untouchable. Before one man stood alone against an entire civilization, that civilization had built a house of idols so vast that questioning it felt like madness. This is not just the story of ancient stone statues. This is the story of how a society slowly replaced God with comfort, fear, tradition, and power. The Torah speaks of generations that drifted away from the one Creator and clung to visible symbols, crafting gods with their own hands and then bowing before them. The Bible describes people who exchanged the glory of the unseen God for images shaped like humans, animals, and forces of nature. And the Quran reveals a people who blindly followed their forefathers, saying, "We found our ancestors upon this way, and we are guided." 3 Revelations. 1 Historical reality. Humanity did not stop believing in God. It stopped trusting Him alone. And if you listen carefully, you will realize something unsettling. The society before Abraham looks frighteningly familiar. Before we go deeper, my friend, if you value stories that uncover uncomfortable truths and force us to reflect on our own world, stay connected with Son of Adam. Not as a clique, but as a shared journey through forgotten wisdom. Now let us return to a time when the earth itself seemed filled with gods. A world full of gods, yet empty of truth. The society before Abraham was not ignorant. It was advanced. It was organized. It was confident. Cities rose with remarkable architecture. Markets buzzed with trade. Astronomy was studied. Calendars were formed, and governance systems were established. This was not a primitive world stumbling in darkness. It was a world glowing with knowledge but blind in guidance. At the center of this society stood idols. Not hidden idols, not secret idols, but public, celebrated, state-protected idols. Every city had its gods. Every profession had its deity. Every fear had a statue. Rain had a god. Fertility had a god. War had a god. Love had a god. Even time and stars were worshipped as divine forces. And above them all stood the supreme idols, believed to control destiny itself. People did not see this as foolish. They saw it as practical. You could not see God, they said. But you could see idols. You could touch them, carry them, threaten them, please them. The unseen required faith. The visible required only ritual. And rituals are far easier than surrender. How idol worship became normal. No society begins with madness. Madness becomes normal through repetition. Long before Abraham, idol worship entered human life as symbolism, not devotion. Elders told stories of righteous ancestors, wise leaders, and heroic figures. To remember them, small statues were made. Not to worship, just to remember. At least, that is what they said. Generations passed. Memory turned into reverence. Reverence turned into fear. Fear turned into worship. Children were born into homes where idols already stood. They never asked who placed them there. They never questioned why stones should be bowed to. Tradition answered all questions before curiosity could speak. The Quran later captures this mindset perfectly, when people said, "We only worship them so that they may bring us closer to God." This was the greatest deception. Idols were not replacing God. They were marketed as shortcuts to Him. And shortcuts always attract crowds. The power structure of idol society. Idols were not just religious objects. They were political tools. Priests controlled rituals. Kings controlled temples. And temples controlled the people. If you wanted rain, you obeyed the priests. If you wanted protection, you paid offerings. If you questioned the idols, you threatened the entire economic system. Faith became currency. Fear became law. The Bible hints at rulers who aligned themselves with gods to legitimize power. If a king claimed divine approval, rebellion became blasphemy. Obedience became worship. And this is where truth became dangerous. Because truth does not need temples. Truth does not need statues. Truth does not need permission. Truth only needs courage. And courage was exactly what this society feared. Astronomy, stars, and false divinity. One of the most influential elements of this pre-Abrahamic society was star worship. People observed the skies with brilliance. They tracked planets, constellations, and celestial movements. But instead of seeing signs pointing to the Creator, they began to worship the creation itself. Stars were believed to control fate. Planets were thought to decide fortune. Astrology replaced accountability. If something went wrong, it was the stars. If injustice happened, it was destiny. If oppression ruled, it was written in the heavens. This belief system was comforting. Because it removed responsibility. Why fight injustice if the stars decided it? Why change society if fate already wrote it? And in a world like this, anyone who challenged destiny was seen as insane or dangerous. The birth of a question. This was the world into which Abraham would be born. A world where questioning idols was worse than committing crimes. A world where truth was inherited, not discovered. But every revolution begins with a question. Not a sword, not an army, a question. And somewhere in this vast house of idols, a child would grow who could not silence the voice inside his heart. A voice that whispered something radical. What if this is all wrong? But that moment has not come yet. Because before Abraham could challenge the idols, he had to understand them. Before he could break statues, he had to confront minds. Before fire would test his faith, society would test his courage. And that is where our story contains. Truth rarely enters the world through palaces. It begins in silence, in isolation, in a heart that refuses to fully accept what everyone else calls normal. Abraham was not born into rebellion. He was born into the very heart of the idol system. And that is what makes his story so dangerous to falsehood. The house that built gods. Abraham's home was not an ordinary home. It was a workshop of belief. A factory of devotion. A place where gods were shaped, polished, repaired, and prepared for worship. According to historical traditions echoed in Islamic sources, Abraham's father, Azar, was deeply connected to idol-making. Whether as a sculptor, merchant, or chief custodian of idols, his livelihood depended on the very system Abraham would later shatter. This meant Abraham did not observe idol worship from a distance. He lived inside it. He saw how idols were carved from wood and stone. He saw how they were painted, decorated, and repaired. He saw how gods broke and were fixed by human hands. And something inside him refused to sleep. If these objects were gods, why did they need maintenance? If they controlled destiny, why did they depend on craftsmen? These were not questions spoken aloud. They were questions that grew quietly. Because in a society like this, curiosity was dangerous. When inheritance replaces truth, the greatest strength of idol society was not fear. It was inheritance. Belief was passed down like property. Questioning it meant dishonoring ancestors. And dishonoring ancestors was considered worse than denying God himself. People did not ask, "Is this true?" They asked, "Is this what our fathers followed?" The Quran later captures this tragedy with painful clarity, describing, People who said, "We follow what we found our forefathers upon," even if they understood nothing and were not guided. Tradition became untouchable, and truth became irrelevant. Abraham stood alone against this inheritance. He did not deny his people immediately. He did not insult them. He questioned them. And questioning is the most threatening act in any false system. The stars that failed. One night, Abraham looked upward. The sky above ancient Mesopotamia was vast and breathtaking. Stars burned with intensity. Planets moved with precision. For a society obsessed with celestial power, this was the highest form of divinity. Abraham observed a star and said, "This is my Lord." But when it disappeared, he said, "I do not love those that fade." Then he observed the moon, radiant and commanding, and considered its greatness. But when it too vanished, he rejected it. Then the sun rose, powerful and overwhelming. Surely this was the greatest of all. But when it set, Abraham turned away. This was not confusion. This was method. Abraham was exposing the flaw in idol logic using their own standards. Anything that rises and falls cannot be God. Anything that appears and disappears cannot be eternal. Anything that submits to laws cannot be the lawgiver. And with this realization, Abraham reached a truth that terrified his society. The Creator was not part of creation. The moment of declaration. Then came the moment that separated Abraham from his entire civilization. He declared openly, "I have turned my face toward the one who created the heavens and the earth, inclining toward truth, and I am not among those who associate partners with him." This was not a theological debate. This was a declaration of war against the entire belief system. Because by rejecting idols, Abraham was not only rejecting gods. He was rejecting authority, economy, politics, culture, and systems do not forgive those who expose their lies. A father against a son. The confrontation between Abraham, A.S., and his father was not emotional drama. It was symbolic warfare. Abraham spoke gently, respectfully, lovingly. He asked why his father worshipped what could not hear, see, or benefit. He warned him of following a path that led to loss. But when truth threatens livelihood, love often collapses. His father responded not with reason, but with power. He threatened Abraham with punishment, expulsion, and abandonment. This is one of the hardest moments in the story. Truth often costs family, guidance often demands loneliness, and faith sometimes requires walking away from the people who raised you. Abraham walked away, but he did not walk away in anger. He walked away with trust in Allah. The silence before the storm. After this rejection, Abraham, A.S., did not immediately break the idols. There was a pause, a silence, because revolutions do not begin with action. They begin with certainty. Abraham now knew the truth. He knew the idols were false. He knew his people were blind. The only question left was how to awaken them. And awakening a sleeping society always requires shock. Every false system eventually faces a moment it cannot escape. A moment when silence breaks. When symbols are challenged. When truth refuses to remain polite. For the society before Abraham, that moment arrived without warning. The day the gods fell silent, the city prepared for celebration. Festivals were sacred occasions when idols were honored publicly. People gathered, offerings were prepared, music echoed through streets that had never known doubt. And Abraham was left behind, alone, with the gods. This was not coincidence. This was destiny arranging the stage. One by one, Abraham approached the idols. They stood proudly, decorated, revered. He did not shout. He did not rage. He questioned them. Why do you not speak? Why do you not respond? Silence. And in that silence, Abraham lifted his hand. The idols fell, shattered, broken, stone cracked, wood splintered. The gods that controlled destiny could not protect themselves. Except one. The largest idol remained standing. On its shoulder, Abraham placed the tool. And then he left. When a society returns to ruins, the people return to devastation. Gods destroyed, temple violated, sacred space shattered, panic turned into rage. Who would dare commit such an act? They remembered Abraham, the one who questioned, the one who refused, the one who walked away. They dragged him forward, and then Abraham delivered one of the most powerful moments in human history. He did not defend himself. He said, "Ask the biggest one, if it can speak." The logic was merciless. If idols were gods, they should answer. If they could not answer, they were never gods. Silence again, and for a brief moment, something terrifying happened. The people understood. The Quran describes it perfectly. They turned inward and admitted, "Indeed, you are the wrongdoers." Truth touched them, just for a moment, but truth is uncomfortable, and comfort is addictive. When truth is rejected on purpose, instead of accepting truth, they attacked it. They did not debate Abraham. They punished him, because systems that survive on lies cannot afford honesty. They decided to burn him alive. Fire was not just punishment. It was a message. This is what happens to those who challenge the gods. The fire was prepared on a scale meant to erase a man from memory. Flames rose. Heat devoured the air. Abraham was bound, thrown, and then something happened that no idol could explain. The fire that failed. The Quran tells us that Allah commanded the fire, "Be coolness and peace upon Abraham." And the impossible occurred. Fire obeyed God, but did not obey idols. The very element worshipped by many civilizations submitted to the one Creator. Abraham emerged unharmed, alive, standing, and in that moment, the entire house of idols collapsed. Not physically, but spiritually, because once people witness truth and still reject it, their downfall is sealed. The real collapse of idol society. The fire did not destroy Abraham. It exposed society. From that day forward, idol worship never looked the same. People continued it, but doubt entered permanently, and doubt is fatal to falsehood. Abraham did not convert the masses that day, but he planted something far more powerful. A question that would echo through generations. What if what we worship cannot even save itself? That question never died. It traveled through history, through prophets, through scriptures, through civilizations, until it reached us. The house of idols was never about stone. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The house of idols was never just about statues. It was about replacing God with anything easier. Power, tradition, status, fear, desire. Modern idols do not sit in temples. They sit in hearts. And this is why the story of Abraham is not ancient history. It is a warning. Every society that refuses to question its idols is standing before its own fire. The only question is, will we walk out of it like Abraham, or bow to what cannot save us? A final word, my friend, if this story stirred something inside you, do not silence it. Truth begins exactly this way. Quietly, uncomfortably, honestly. Stay connected with Son of Adam. Not for content, but for clarity. Like this journey, reflect, and share your thoughts, because conversations like these are how idols truly fall. The house of idols may change its shape, but the need for Abraham's never ends.